budget. If you can call the roll, please.
Yes. Roll call, Mayor Odekirk.
Here.
Councilman Dickinson.
Here.
Councilwoman Gavin, absent. Councilman Hug.
Here.
Councilman Morris.
Here.
Councilman Mudrin.
Here.
Councilwoman Quillman.
Here.
Councilwoman Reardon.
Here.
Councilman Turk.
Here.
First, we have citizens to be heard on agenda items. Is there anyone that would like to be heard on an agenda item? Please come up to the podium, please.
Can you give your name and address, please, for the record?
My name is Christopher Greenwood. I am an employee here in the Joliet area. I live in Stager, my address is 16 West 33rd in Stager, Illinois. I've been a long time employee in the Joliet area. I'm working for a hotel. I'm currently an area sales manager. I maintain 4 hotels in the area. And we're here to talk about the hotel tax increase. The Hotel Lodging Association is obviously very against having this tax put on our hotels. We're in a difficult time right now as it is with the amount of hotels that we have in the area. Volumes are down throughout. We surely can't experience the loss from the increase of tax to our neighboring cities. The downturn in occupancy impacting the ability to generate tax revenue, create jobs, and reduce the contributions to the local economy. Current tax rate for some of our neighboring cities like Sherwood and Plainfield are currently at 5% for the city tax. If we took this increase in there, we would be more than double the tax rate for our neighboring cities. Now, you do talk that there are some other cities up north of us that are higher than us. What we experience from that is we get a lot of business hotel rooms from companies that come down to Joliet for that tax rate. We have a lot of companies that have a lot of business, nightly business that comes through. There is a member of our lodging association right now that has a $600,000 contract on the table right now with the Joliet property. And they reached out to the team, and they either want us to absorb this tax increase or they're going to move the business to somewhere where they can get that tax rate. And I mean, that's a huge amount of money, $600,000 in revenue. The tax generated on that alone, that's a huge loss for the city. Not to mention the amount of money that comes through from the dining, entertainment, gas taxes, and everything else. That's all that I have to say about it at this time.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kate Berry. I am a general manager at Chief Hotels in Joliet. I represent the Best Western Bus and the company unit. In addition, I'm a board member of the Hotel Lodging Association. Sorry.
Excuse me for a moment. Mayor, are these mics working?
We're working on that. I'm trying to work it out.
Okay.
You know, along those lines, I'm sorry, at the last meeting, I think the first 15 minutes, there was no volume being recorded. Do we know what happened there?
It's the first time I've heard of that.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
Give you a minute to relax.
Yeah, appreciate that. So increased costs and taxes for hotels paired with lower business demand will require owners to provide additional operating costs and reduce their workforce. Currently, some hotels in Joliet receive an annual decrease in occupancy by 1 to 10%, and an average yearly rate decrease from 1 to 15%. Hotels within Joliet employ an estimated 500 employees who generate payroll taxes and spend within our community. A hotel tax increase will result in a decrease in staff and affect those payroll taxes and spending. In addition, the very guests that we are worried about sending to other cities currently contribute to Joliet's sales tax revenue through dining and shopping, as well as gas tax during their travel. A reduction in our business will cause a ripple effect to those other supported entities. Future developments of new hotels will become stagnant as a result of the increased tax burden and the effects it will have on future feasibility studies. Supporting a hotel tax rate increase would be conveying a message that the city of Joliet does not support tourism and is encouraging travelers to go elsewhere. On a personal note, I can say that the last year has been really difficult for the hotels I represent. We've had to reduce our margins, which means we're cutting costs everywhere that we can. If we cut too much, we affect our guests, and then they don't want to stay with us. They'll go across the street, they'll go to the next town, whatever. We're getting to the point where the only thing I have left to cut are my employees and the hours that they work. Most of my employees come from Joliet. They don't drive, they live here, they shop here, they buy everything that they use in Joliet. And this is gonna have a really horrible effect on my employees, everybody who works for me, even my guests who've come to love them. It's really a sad situation, and it's maybe just 3% to you, but it represents a lot of people's livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. My name is Dan Scott. I'm the president of the Will County Lodging Association. I'm also the regional manager for Posh Hospitality. We have 4 hotels here in Joliet. 1 we're developing and 3 we currently run. And I've been in this industry for 16 years. I've worked in the Joliet market for almost 10 years between Harris and Hollywood, as well as the hotels I'm in now. A hotel increase, we must not forget, we've had a big change in 2020 to hotels. A new state law is requiring us to install panic safety devices for every employee in every hotel. This cost is almost $10,000 to $30,000 this year, and we've only had about 12 months to prepare for this. This is a major cost that many hotel owners here in Joliet were not prepared to spend. And honestly, it's not something that's going to return an ROI on us. We do believe in the safety of our employees, and it's very important, but this tax will affect, another cut. Besides that, we're also having to do new training that's required by the state of Illinois in sex trafficking as well as sexual harassment, and we have to purchase the proper programs for these trainings. That's another cost of up to $4,000 this year per hotel in Joliet. We also are taking on the new minimum wage over the next 5 years. We're projecting between 5% and 30% increase in payroll. So, these are all additional costs over the next 5 years that we're experiencing. So this hotel tax, again, many think it's carried on to the customer. But being in Joliet with 26 hotels and we're competing against each other, plus the neighboring towns, we constantly have to reduce average daily rate to be competitive. So our margins are becoming slimmer and slimmer. We've met with Mr. Jones last week, our president, myself, and our vice president, to talk about the hotel increase. And we were informed it's going to be used for a special fund in the city to help build tourism. There's a proven process and structure that cities around the country have implemented to do so, called a Tourism Improvement District, where hotels opt in to charge an assessment to customers that is dedicated to a particular fund that is tasked to grow tourism within the community. The entire state of California has done this. Texas and Rockford, Illinois is currently working on it. These specific ROI metrics are metrics that have to be met, and in turn, the growth of tourism will result with increased promotional efforts to pay itself. It doesn't change the tax rate, and it actually helps increase sales tax within the community. So you'll see an actual increase in the tourism hotel tax by not changing it, by charging this assessment. The Joliet hotel community would be willing and interested in sitting down with the city council and the mayor and Mr. Jones to discuss how we can work together in an effort to do a TID instead of this hotel tax increase. Dallas, for example, did this, and then within 2 years, they saw from the funds from that assessment increase occupancy levels for Dallas by 17%. So just using that example alone, if we can increase occupancy by 17%, that would generate almost $300,000 in additional hotel tax, without increasing the rate. We want to be a partner with the city and have the same desire to grow revenues for the Joliet, but at the same time, it needs to be a balanced approach that allows tourism to grow in our city as well. We hope that the City Council will hear our message loud and clear that we want to work with the local hotel industry and find a good middle ground. So I'm here to answer any questions at any time. We want to work together on this, and we hope you oppose the hotel tax and give us an opportunity to sit down and talk about what's the best direction to go with this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lorenz. I work for Raymond Management, and we represent the Home 2 Suites and the Town Place in Joliet. Our company just sold the Hamptons. I've worked in the hotels now for, it'll be 20 years in January, so I've seen a lot of changes in the industry. And I kind of wanted to share with you, I've sat on the board with you for the Heritage Corridor, Mike, some of the changes that have happened over the years. So just to inform you, in 2001, the city passed a law that they would keep all of the extended stay taxes. So prior to that, before you would get your 6% back if you stayed 30 days or more. So in 2001, that was changed. And now our guests have to pay the 6% tax, and they pay the 7%, gets rebated back to the state of Illinois. Also, the city used to pay for a shuttle service that we used to have that would go from the hotels to the attractions in the area. Also, some of the other things, in 2014, the city used to use 1% of the tax revenue came from the hotels for the Heritage Corridor to promote tourism. At that point, the Heritage Corridor had about 20 employees and promoted the area and worked with a lot of the attractions and brought a lot of people in. And now I think we have 6 people at the Heritage Corridor. After the money was taken away from the Heritage Corridor, that 1%, we did have also in 2014, the city did do a tourism department, which had 3 employees, and that dissolved by 2010. So like they were saying, we do have continuous supply in the Joliet area, and so with continued supply, it is taking the rates down here in the Joliet area. And so definitely if you guys could kind of let us kind of share our ideas and things for promoting more tourism, it would be increasing taxes.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to address the council on an agenda item? Seeing none. Next is discussion on city manager's recommended 2020 budget.
Okay, thank you. As we did at the last meeting, we went into some of the details of the budget, sort of as the latter half. And at that point, we had the library do a presentation regarding their plans for Project Burnham. We've scheduled the Rialto to give a short presentation with regard to their request, which of course has been an ongoing request for the city. So I would certainly invite Val or Bob or whoever would like to do the presentation to come on up. And there is a PowerPoint, so take it away.
Come on up here, Val. Mayor, City Council, good evening. My name is Bob Filato, and I chair the Will County Metropolitan Exposition Auditorium Authority. And in a few minutes, Val will make a short presentation, very short. But I simply wanted to say that as I reflected back on the last couple of years, this council challenged us to really reinvigorate the Rialto Theater. Additional programming, more traffic, community involvement. And I think we've not only met, but we've exceeded those expectations. And I think you'll see that shortly. I also am confident that we will do that in the future as well. Now, I could sit here and tell you, as some of you, and I know our board, and we have some board members with us, as we go around town, especially this time of the year, people come up and say, hey, Rialto's doing a great job, you're doing a great job. And I'm so quick to say that it's because of this lady right here. I shudder to think what we would have done without Val the last couple of years. We're fortunate to have her passion, we're fortunate to have her leadership. Her staff is constantly telling me that. And so I want to publicly acknowledge and thank Val for all the work that she's done. She puts in an ungodly amount of hours. You can find her at her desk, you can find her waiting tables, you can find her cleaning the bathroom. The other thing about Val is that, as opposed to the previous ED, is she has jumped into the community up to her earlobes. I can't begin to tell you the number of organizations she's involved in, but I do know that Rotary is one of them. But I do see her involved in a number of things around town, and I know, Jan, that was a big issue with you.
Yep.
and
There's
I
no
trust-
comparison with her and the previous guy at all.
Absolutely at all.
She's fabulous,
Yeah.
just saying that.
I agree, she is fabulous. So I'm going to turn it over to Val and let her do her thing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. Wasn't expecting that. And Mayor and Council, Sherry, welcome. This is my first time in front of you, so hope it goes as well as I hope it will. So I have a presentation. Oh, there it is. And first of all, Bob, as the president, or the chair, and I'm the executive director, as you all know. Some of the things we're going to talk about in the presentation are the financial snapshot, sponsorship and development, a year-to-year comparison, and just as a reminder, this is an 18 to 19-year comparison, and our fiscal year, unlike yours, begins July 1st and ends on the 31st, so we're actually in our year 20. The genres of entertainment we've addressed, programming highlights, venue improvements, neighborhood inclusion, community outreach, the average customer expenditure, and our growth in social media, along with just a snapshot of the year in photos. So if we take a quick glance at FY19 versus 18 actual financials, you can see that in 19, as compared to 18, we had $110,109 difference, which was a 3.5% increase in our income. As would have expected, our expenses also increased by about 3%. That's because with more shows and more events, you have more expenses that correlate to the shows and events. So when you do more, it costs you more. And our net loss was less in 19 than it was in 18, which contributes to our reduction in the ask for the city for our funding. When we go over to sponsorship and development, we had a 25% increase of about $50,000. We were able to maintain prior sponsorship relationships, and the department has worked to garner new sponsorship from Blue Ribbon Products, Edward Jones Investment, Jackson Generation, Xfinity, who is sponsoring this evening's show, Window World of Joliet, Hometown National Bank, and Serve Pro. And then all of our 13 movies that we did this past year, our movie series and our holiday movies, were all sponsored. So again, if we look at 19 versus 18, we had an increase of 35 events, which is about 20%. Our tickets increased, 14,757 paid tickets, and you'll notice that there was a drop in the average ticket price. That, I believe, is greatly impacted by the fact that we added $5 movies. So that really offsets the higher price ticket of a national touring show, and we had 13 movies, so it really does impact that number. Our weddings have done a great business, and you can see that our stagehand hours have increased, more events, larger tours, so that when you have a Broadway tour like a Rent or a Janis Joplin or a Chris Angel, it requires more stagehands to be on. And a quick calculation, 53% of our stagehands live in Joliet. The increased hours means more jobs and more expendable income staying in Joliet. Our programming the past year, we had quite a wide variety. We brought back our Broadway, which a lot of people had asked us to do, and started off with Sound of Music, which was a great success, followed by Rent, and we did Janis Joplin. In addition, we kept the old standard favorites like our comedians, Boss Gags, so the music that people have come to know and love. And we've also dabbled again in getting back into children's programming, as is evidenced by our Disney Junior, and of course tonight we're featuring Rudolph. One of the other things we embarked in was trying to have our presence on Chicago Street ramped up a little bit. The Klings, I don't know if you remember, I don't know, those people are probably long dead and gone, and we're probably paying royalties to them, and they're not even with us anymore. So we scraped off those old Klings, put up some new ones, found that there were some cracked windows, so we replaced those. This past 2 weeks, we had all the awnings replaced on the front of the building, and we replaced all of the light bulbs in the marquee with energy-efficient LED lights, which will help us be able to keep the lights on longer in the evenings for days when we don't have shows, and also not to impact our bottom line. We are getting new front doors that'll have the panic bars, and in the front of the building and in the back where the stage loads in, we're also getting new doors back there. Those should be coming within the next, I'd say, 1 to 2 months. So we're very excited about how we're looking to the public when they come down. We also pride ourselves on being good neighbors with some of our locals. We have allowed Chever, Milano, TCBY, and Dan's Homemade Candies to come and sell their products in our lobby for shows of a variety of different kinds. Dan's Candies was a big hit. I think it was at the Nutcracker. I think they said they went back to their store 4 or 5 times to replenish their stock. So it's nice because we are bringing in people from out of town who might not have known that Dan's Candies existed. So we are trying to be good neighbors in that respect. Our community outreach, we've done blood drives, seminars, of course, our local Music Mondays, our 2nd annual Beer Bash, our school matinee series was a big success. Star Wars Days has been a lot of fun for us. We participate in University of St. Francis Kids Fest, Pause on 66, New Orleans North, and we've also been very active in the Vet Ticks organization, giving back to our veterans. The next slide is the average per person audience expenditure. Americans for the Arts serves, advances, and leads the network of organizations and individuals who cultivate, promote, sustain, and support the arts in America. Founded in 1960, Americans for the Arts is the nation's leading nonprofit organization for advancing the arts and arts education. The Arts and Economic Prosperity Calculator is a simple tool that makes it possible to estimate the economic impact of nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. These estimates are based on research findings from the 182 study regions that were part of Americans for the Arts National Economic Impact Study of nonprofit arts and cultural organizations and their audiences. So if you multiply the $24.60 by the number of visitors we had last year, that alone contributes $1.5 million in ancillary revenue to Joliet and their downtown businesses. We've also worked very hard on our social footprint. So as you can see, we've done a great job of increasing Facebook, Twitter, and of course, Instagram. And last, just a few pictures of what the Rialto has been doing in the past year. Some of you may be in some of those pictures. We're very proud of what we've been able to do in the crowds. Pardon me, we've been able to bring. Do not get this cold. That's what I can tell you. Fortunately, thank you for your continued support of the Jewel of Joliet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
Get me
questions?
water. We both have the same idea.
Any questions for the Rialto team?
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, any questions?
You okay, Val?
We'll make sure she's okay.
I had a cough drop in the wings.
I was gonna say, I have a bag if you need some.
Thank you.
You do or you don't?
No, I'm good, I've got one
Okay.
in now.
Any questions?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
No, great job.
Okay, to hit what I refer to as the meat of the budget, I'll give everyone a little bit of a recap as to where we've gone since our last meeting. You recall at the last workshop, there were several documents that members of the council had asked for, which have been presented to you and are in the agenda packet. There's an analysis of our fund balance, what's happened over the last 5 fiscal years. We also had an exhibit that identified hotel motel taxes within neighboring communities. We had a local motor fuel tax survey that showed the local gas tax within neighboring communities. We had a breakdown of what are the components of the various taxes in Illinois relating to fuel, the county, the state, the federal, the local. And lastly, we had a hypothetical bond issue. I believe it was Councilman Hugg had asked for the breakdown of principal and interest in a $20 million bond issue. So those documents have been presented to you, and you may have some questions about those as we go through the remainder of the budget discussion. What I did to kind of take some of the hot button items, out of the big thick document and put it into something that's a few pages long, I identified some of the new increases that are affecting the budget, revenues, et cetera. First off, increases. We show $8.3 million in new expenses that are proposed and anticipated for 2020. Of that $8.3 million, really 54% of it consists of pensions, along with the start of a capital program for vehicle replacement. Pensions are 32% of that budget, and the capital transfer for vehicles is 22. And then we have a decreasing percentage, 800,000 professional services, such as engineering, consulting fees within departments, fire overtime, other salary expenses, meaning people that are moving through the payroll system, step plans, et cetera. We have a number of IT security projects underway, contractual services, the new positions within the community development department that are proposed to be funded through some of the increases, along with the legal position that was discussed. Salt, we all know we got whacked with a much higher price for salt this year than we have in previous years. The personal protective equipment program, which will basically put some safety equipment in the hands of our employees to basically minimize injuries, and then just some miscellaneous. So those are the main things, 8.3 million, those are the main components of what's, sorry, Val, I think I caught it. Those are the main drivers of the increases. On the revenue side, we have a number of items that equate to about 4.7 million. The hotel motel tax, which we had some public input on, it's proposed that our current 7% hotel motel tax go to 10%. The last increase to that was about 10 years ago. And we did attach the hotel motel tax survey, which showed that Bolingbrook, I think, was at the high end 11%, Romeoville at 10. We would propose going to 10. And then there are a number of communities that are smaller, in that 5.5%, 6% range and downward. Local gas tax increase. We propose going from 1 cent per gallon to 4 cents per gallon. That would generate 1.8 million. We also provided you with a survey showing some of the survey. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You know me, always have a bag.
We gave you a survey showing what some of the neighboring towns are. Crest Hill's at 0. They're not on the list because they are at 0. Manhattan was at 2%, 2 cents. And then we had a number of others within our neck of the woods who were between 4 cents and 7 cents. Contractor registrations, new program, folks doing work on building projects in town. This would require a fee, $585,000 proposed there. Building permits, we've already adopted a minor building permit fee increase, but this is what we would call sort of the major increases. You know, these are the new big boxes, new homes, the kind of things that are really a construction project versus a remodeling, rehab. And then, of course, the cannabis tax, which was already implemented. So again, you know, we talked about $8.3 million of expenses. Well, we have $4.7 million of new revenues here. There are other things in the budget, but these are really the major ones. How are we going to spend that new revenue? And I think it's important to look at, you know, what's behind this. This isn't just a question of trying to balance the budget. In the case of the hotel motel tax, I'm proposing that if the council does approve this, that we use that money to provide a stable revenue source to fund or support what I'm calling our city cultural assets. As you all know, we've provided money to the Rialto, we've provided money to the Historical Museum, we've been, well, we are the owners of DuPage Medical Group Field. Every budget year, it always appears that it becomes, not a competition, but it's sort of the old guns and butter. You know, it's like some of these cultural assets, we know they're the heart and soul of our community. They always seemingly become controversial in terms of what are they taking away from the rest of the community. You know, they're taking away sidewalks, are they taking away police? So what I'm proposing, because in effect the hospitality industry benefits from these type of cultural assets because it brings tremendous numbers of people to town, that in effect we earmark that money to preserve and protect these cultural assets and basically not put that money in the general fund. So it's a way to, you know, it's not an enterprise fund, it's not something that is, you know, hard and fast as to what money would go to which cultural asset. But I think it gives us an opportunity to sort of put our money where our mouth is. If we think these things are important, that let's find a stable funding source related to hospitality, because in effect, this does generate people, and then try to get that to a sustainable level. So that's the logic behind the hotel motel tax. I don't think there's any secret as to what the local fuel tax is earmarked for. We've had several presentations over the last 2 to 3 months from our fleet folks and Public Works Department about the need for vehicle replacement. We've kicked the can for a lot of years. There's an estimate that, there may be as much as $16 million that should be put into the fleet to basically bring us up to an acceptable standard. I think we're all realistic, and we know those kind of funds can't be garnered in a single budget year. But we looked at the local gas tax to see what exactly that tax could generate and how could we utilize that for fleet replacement purposes. This isn't a new idea. I think I've been here almost 5 years, and I've probably heard it discussed for 4 different budgets, and it never got, I don't think it got to the table. Maybe it did last year. But, the point is, the revenue situation is decreasing a little bit in terms of our ability to rely upon certain revenues. Our expenses are certainly going up, and the cars ain't getting any younger, and the equipment isn't getting any younger. So we took the step of saying, look, why don't we shoot for a $4 million bond issue, utilize this tax to raise about $1.8 million. In the first year, we would have the benefits of the 1.8 plus the 4 million to start to tackle those fleet needs. And then once we start paying off the debt service in a 10-year bond, there's about $480,000 that would be needed to pay that debt service for 10 years. Well, the difference between the 480 and the 1.8 could obviously go into the fleet. So it becomes somewhat of a sustaining method of funding our fleet needs. So that's the logic behind the gas tax. Under the contractor registration, building permits, development fees, as I alluded to earlier, there are several new positions that are within the Community Development Department. We've lost our edge to a certain degree with regard to our ability to take a big development and to get it in and out the door quickly. The number of people we have has stayed stagnant. I mean, since the recession, we had the same number of people for the most part, but the number of permits and some of the complexity of permits has increased. So it's a common complaint. I mean, I get it. I know I hear from elected officials about somebody complaining that their permit's in the queue for 6 weeks. They haven't even gotten an answer on it. I mean, that's the reality of where we are with the volume. So we had some serious discussions with regard to the Community Development Director, building staff. We're proposing an additional building inspector, a permit clerk to help get that flow of permits through the system quicker, at least to get them to the right people, and then an upgrade of a part-time position that's become vacant, making that a full-time position. Now, the fee increases that we've talked about certainly pay for those positions and then some. It generates a lot of additional revenue. We're not just trying to make revenue, we're trying to basically, what we're not using to pay for these positions, we are trying to balance the budget. And based on surveys that have been done through community development, I mean, our fees are woefully behind. So again, this is one of those increases that probably should have happened over time, more gradually. And now it's time. Now there's a compelling need. The last tax is the cannabis tax, which of course was adopted by council, so I won't go into that. So those are sort of the highlights of this. I didn't mention the fact in this summary, and I probably should have, but it's a pass-through, is we have a 2.4% increase from waste management on our waste hauling. That's just proposed as a pass-through. So I didn't identify that as new revenue, but technically it is, but it's also an expense. So it zeroes out in our budget. So, none of these things, how do I describe this? I mean, we don't have any monopoly on good ideas in this room. I mean, this isn't something like city council, you need to do all this, there's no option. No, I mean, if there's a better idea that anyone has to fund some of these programs or to start working towards some sustainable revenue sources, tell us what you think. We put things together, we kind of package them for specific programs, but in effect, I mean, we're in a period where we've had 2 deficits in the last couple of years, we expect one this year, and unless we make some of these changes or reduce some expenditures, we'll be looking at 2020 deficits. So, revenues and expenses, that's what a budget is. And any idea here is valuable and we will find useful but we're trying to give you something that makes some good sense in our opinion. Now, what happens if we didn't do any of these increases? In effect, we have about a $4.2 million deficit before we start making cuts. Certainly, eliminating the $1.8 million transfer for fleet becomes one of the easy things to do. Removing some of the discretionary capital items that are in the budgets. I mean, we have, sidewalk program, hate to say it, but, what do we do there? Tree program. We have some improvements within IT. We have some improvements that are IT-related, technology-related within police. There's probably $1.5 to $2 million of things that could come out of the budget. Will it hurt? Will it be short-sighted? Absolutely. But I think those are the kind of decisions that we, ultimately you have to make when you're doing some austerity moves on a budget. We have a couple of of approved but not yet filled positions. I think that amounts to about $200,000. We have the new positions we talked about within community development. That's about $210,000. And then sadly, we get into the whole issue of we probably average about 25 people a year who leave the village, either leave the city, either retire, take a job elsewhere, or for whatever reason leave. We may have to look at evaluating whether that position should be filled over time. If we assume $80,000 in salary and benefits, 20 people, that's $1.6 million. So over the course of a year, some of that starts to add up for cuts. So again, this is not, this is not the only options we have with regard to expenses and what could be on a cut. There are probably other things revenue-wise, but I think since you've had time to think about these increases and these changes, I think it's a good place for us to start having the discussion of how we want to tackle this. It could be revenues, it could be expenses, or it could be a combination of both. So I'll shut up and get your input.
Mayor.
Yep.
Steve, one question. When we projected revenues for the current budget 2019, some of those I'm sure did not meet our expectations, the revenue portion. Do you know in the whole budget how much we're short of the revenue projections we came under?
I'll turn that over to Mr. Gadati since I wasn't part of that budget process last year.
What revenues didn't we get that we anticipated a year
Like a
ago?
total for the whole budget? Are we,
I will turn that over to Ken, who put together the revenues for this year. I know the sales tax is coming in quite a bit lower.
Sit, if you want, you could sit where the economic development director usually sits.
Mayor, council, good evening. Some of the things that we're seeing that are falling behind right now, where we budgeted, Councilman Turk, are the sales taxes. Those seem to be less than last year and less than budgeted. Also, utility taxes, I know are another one that we're seeing decrease, and then and that includes things like telecommunications and such that we're seeing are down. Those are
Okay.
probably the big ones.
do we have an idea, like, as a total, how much?
What we had in the budget was about I think it was about 2.8 to 3 million,
Okay.
roughly.
So as a result of that, are we projecting lower revenues for next year in the
Well,
budget?
Yes, so I believe we're slightly ahead next year. I don't have it right in front of me, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But we tried to, there's certain revenues that we thought might go up a little bit, other ones that were down, some are trending up a little bit. Some of them we had increases in because we proposed, tax increases. But pretty flat to just a little bit up, I think is the general trend.
So that's causing part of the deficit that we're in this year,
is.
not meeting revenue expectations.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had a real strong, like in sales taxes, we had a very strong last quarter last year, and then it seems to have turned now. Some of these taxes too, just to let you know, we've only got 7 or 9 months in for some of these because of the accruals that we do. So,
Right.
So we're still missing a quarter of the year. I guess if we had a very strong Christmas, maybe it gets a little bit better than we think.
Okay.
but it does seem like it's been just, maybe about 3-4% in sales taxes. And sales taxes are one of our biggest revenues.
Right.
And then the other I should mention too is gaming.
That's down also, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ken,
Yes.
was there any special area in the sales tax that was unique to this year that would come back next year, or this is an overall number?
No, that's okay. You know what? The sales tax, it's hard because it's so many different components. I don't think we dug deep enough into it to say that it's this particular industry or that particular industry. That's probably the closest we could get. It seems like it's just down, but I don't know the reason
I just,
why.
as we all know, there's a number of bigger retailers that are no longer in business.
Yeah, I would think that anecdotally contributes to it, and I know that, I think, Jim, we expected to see more from the Wayfair decision. So Wayfair was a court case that was in South Dakota, I believe, and it had to do with internet sales. And we expected to see more increase from that, but I understand that they're still jockeying it out in the state and other things. So that's something that may come in later, but I'm not sure if, I can't put a dollar amount on it, but it seems like maybe there's some revenue that could come in later, but it's still hard to measure.
Okay, one more question, Ken.
Yes.
So, based on what the projections we're doing for 2020's budget for revenue projections, you feel pretty confident that the projections we're going into are pretty, I don't know, conservative based on what we experienced this year?
Well, I think,
I know it's tough.
Yeah, no, it is very tough to estimate, right? So I try not to be overly conservative or overly aggressive in this
Right.
case.
Okay.
Probably, if anything, maybe a little more aggressive than sometimes it was in the past, because we're not trying to undershoot it as well.
Right.
But I think, based on the information, a lot of the time when I do this, I try to look at, let's say, the last 3 years, and I try to look at
Okay.
trends. But, sometimes they surprise us to the good side, and sometimes they go in the opposite direction.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
One more. Ken, can you talk about expenses then for a second? I know Steve highlighted some increases that are affecting the 2020 budget. And the one, obviously, would be an expense then, is 9%, $727,000 in overtime for fire department. So that number is where it's running, or guesstimated that it's going to run this year over what was budgeted for that?
Yeah, so I may
that-
turn to Jim, because Jim did work more on the expense side of this, so if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you.
The budget for overtime for the fire department, the way it was computed is we took the last 3 years and took the average and put that in for next year. 1 year, we were over $3 million. That was about a year ago. And that's where that number comes from. And I will point out that does not include reimbursable overtime. That is a separate line item, which is reimbursed by the entity that they may work for. The big one you're familiar with is the racetrack. So that is a separate line item.
And that's a good question, because I think, and I'm going to look at our acting chief as I say this, I think that one is probably going to be a lower expense in 2020. You'll notice, where we had projected in 2019, which was not realistic. But in 2020, we have a draft sick leave policy, revised sick leave policy that's going to be implemented. We also have several other, let's call them management options that we could utilize to get a much more aggressive handle on that. We hope to work it out through the sick leave policy, but we have several other tools that by mid-year, will potentially be implemented to make sure that the summer of 2020 doesn't reflect what happened the summer of 2019. So I would say that number is not going to be as high as we project. But, ultimately, sometimes you have a couple of injuries and people are filling in and overtime starts to kick in, so they're uncontrollable factors. But we're trying to take care of the controllable factors. Anything I should add to that, Chief?
Well, there are a few other items that I think we need to address is our special teams that we've enjoyed for well over 25 years. We've seen the coming of age of the personnel that have been on it. We've seen some people step away, and our numbers are starting to dwindle on those teams. So part of that is replacing personnel on those specialized teams, and those people have to be sent for certification, and that is done on their time off, so overtime is included in that. And then we also have to include schooling for our new hires as far as not only EMT, but paramedic. We have 3 that will be starting school January 1st. We have 3 new employees that will be coming on probably February or March that we have to anticipate. And then we're anticipating at least another half dozen retirements after that we also have to fund or prepare to fund for them to go to EMT and medic school as well. So that's inclusive in this as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions on any of these items? I guess we're looking for some direction as to where the council may want us to go. As you know, we have a public hearing scheduled for the pre-council, and then obviously we have to have a budget that's on the agenda. So I think, just from an informal consensus standpoint, it's certainly easier for us to make changes if council does want changes at this point than it would be to do it on the dais on the night of an actual budget vote.
Well, I'll speak for a minute, Steve. I said last meeting about the breaking protocol, because, since I've been mayor, if any city manager was gonna propose a single tax increase, they would have come to me and would have gone to the council to build consensus before you ever put it out there. So you didn't do that. As far as I can tell, you didn't talk to anyone on the council. But you asked for a better idea for sustainable growth or to maintain what we have. Well, I would point to the last 4 years since I've been mayor of the city of Joliet. When I came in, we had a reserve fund of $52 million, $588,000. At the end of 2018, our reserve fund was $53 million, $293,000. So we grew the reserve fund, and we did it without raising a single tax in 4 years. So certainly, the roadmap is there on how to do this. As far as the projections, and Ken Mihalich and Jim Gadati, I appreciate your work, and you guys do project conservatively. I think it's the right way to do it. I think when you're wrong in the right direction, so we aren't getting burned. But, the reality is, I went back and looked at some of the notes from, I give a State of the City speech every year. In 2015, we went into that year with a projected $8.6 million deficit. When I gave my speech in February 2016, I reported to the people of Joliet that we had a $1.7 million windfall. And that was off the numbers I was given Mr. Gadati from your department. The reality is in 2015, we had over $4 million in windfall. So that projection was almost $13 million off in 2015. It was off by about 4 or 5 million in 2016. So, I could go on. Again, I appreciate that we're erring on the side of caution, but Mr. Jones, and maybe I misunderstood you. Last meeting we had, you talked about a potential $11 million deficit. Today, you talked about a $4.2 million deficit. Those comments, maybe I didn't, well, I know you said 11 million a couple weeks ago.
No, I don't know where the 4.2 is. I'm talking about the next fiscal year. So when I said 4.2, that was assuming that the 2020 budget would not implement any of the revenue increases. And sorry, I went quick, so that's probably why you heard something.
My misunderstanding. I don't believe we're going to see $11 million deficit. I don't think anyone believes that that's a real number. So I know I don't support this. If it gets to me, I won't vote for it. There's a better way to do business. We have, over the last 4 years, and maybe that number needs to be put out there, how many vehicles we have replaced. I know 1 year, we bought 80 or 90 new squad cars. There's no mention of that. We keep talking about a crisis with the vehicles, and I agree that after the recession in 2008, that we didn't pay proper attention to that. But if we're looking at that type of deficit, then this isn't the year to start the capital replacement program. And you're correct. The gas tax has been kicked around, and you are also correct, it never made up to the dais because the council rejected it before it ever got to this. There weren't a bunch of stories in the newspapers throwing the city council under the bus. It was shot down before it ever got up here. So again, I would look at the record of what's happened in the last 4 years. I don't know what the numbers are gonna be at the end of the year. If we are running deficits, then I think you consider tax increases. But to do it based on projections that are wrong every year, demonstrably wrong every year, I don't think it's responsible.
Right. I'd point out a couple of things, Mary, and we get into the projections, and I understand that there are always variations, and, you know, Mr. Gadadi and Mr. Mahalik will talk about the fact that there are always variables because you go into a budget year sometimes with 9 months of data because of the accruals. But if you look at, you know, 2016, we ran a $1.9 million deficit. We had a surplus, 1.2 in 17. We had a $2.5 million deficit in 18. Those weren't projections. That was real, you know, those were real effects. So in effect, we have stayed relatively close as to what our fund balance, our reserve balance is during this time period. But also keep in mind that our general fund budget is increasing. We have a policy that 20% of our total budget is in reserves. Well, as your budget starts to get larger and larger and larger, obviously that 20% starts to get larger and larger. So we're getting a little close to hitting that 20% reserve. So, you know, we're both saying kind of the same thing, but I'm saying it more in terms of there's a trend line here that necessitates action. You know, it's not look in the past and you'll get the same results. I'm saying look in the future, you're going to start seeing different kinds of results. And with 2 deficit years in the past that were real numbers and a projection this year for 19, you know, I have serious concerns, and I'm trying to avoid the possibility that 2020 is a deficit year, and we haven't done anything significant with regard to our fleet. So those are my concerns. And, you know, we haven't done, I mean, we all know, we haven't done a good job of our fleet. We haven't done a good job taking care of our properties in town, our assets. You know, we've kicked the can. And, you know, every town does it to a certain point, but I think the needs are increasing greater than the attention we're paying some of these needs. And unfortunately, you know, as they say, there's a time to pay the bill. And if that's 2020, so be it. If it's not 2020, you know, there's going to be a period where this is going to have to be dealt with in one way, shape, or form.
And I guess I would say in response, I agree with you about some of the things the city hasn't done well. And certainly maintaining our property is one of them. When I became mayor, there was no master list. No one could identify all the property that Joliet owns.
Absolutely.
So that we've done that the last 4 years. But there is no plan on what we're going to do with the property. There's been discussions, but nothing on paper. Just simply raising taxes, going back to the taxpayers without any identifiable way that we're going to fix the problem is irresponsible. And I brought up this a couple weeks ago with the parking decks. You know, we have 40 or 50-year-old parking decks. The council voted to raise do a parking increase downtown to raise additional revenues. We're going to invest a couple $1 million back in the decks. I don't know whoever decided that was the right course of action. You know, I'll say to give the caveat. I'm not saying it was wrong, but did you make that decision? Was that just Steve Jones's call? Because the council didn't decide, let's keep throwing money at 40 or 50-year-old decks and not consider other options. And I'd say the same thing with the properties. We could say we're going to raise more money and invest them in properties. I don't know if we should invest them in some of these properties that may be 60, 70 years old. There is no plan of what we're going to do. And I think before we go back to taxpayers and demand more money, we should have identifiable plans and goals on how we're going to get there.
Yeah. I'll address your parking deck question. Both at the Public Service Committee and the Finance Committee, we talked about the need for the decks. In effect, we brought it to the City Council. City Council decided to implement a fee increase, which basically talked about 2 decks. So no, Steve Jones didn't make that decision. I think the City Council did. And at a meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago, you had talked about perhaps having the Finance Committee take a look and see whether selling a deck or both decks would be in order. We do have that intent to go to Finance and start that philosophical discussion. With regard to our properties, you're absolutely right. I mean, things were a shambles. I'm not, you know, I hope we know what properties we own at this point in time, but I'll hand it to, I don't know where Ken went. Ken Mahalik was part of the group that put together an evaluation of what are the maintenance needs over time. You're right. We don't have a plan. at least now, you know, we know what we own, we know what are the conditions of these buildings. We have a general dollar amount as to what's needed. It's staggering. It's absolutely staggering. And it gets to the point, you know, we're trying to tackle the vehicles, which, you know, if a building roof leaks, you know, that's one thing. If we don't have a plow on the street because, you know, 26-year-old piece of equipment doesn't work, big difference in terms of the impact on the residents. So we're taking these, I mean, I've only been doing this for 7 months, but we're trying to find a way to get these things out there so the council knows their issues and the council knows we're trying to put together a plan. But it's going to take money or come up with an alternative.
May I say something?
Yeah, real quick. You're right, it's a staggering amount, so the decision should be made whether we're gonna throw money into an 80-year-old building or whether we're gonna go in a different direction. You said the council made the decision on putting money back into the parking decks? Councilman Dickinson, do you know the private individual that wanted to buy the Scott Street deck? Do you know who he is and how much he was gonna offer for that?
No.
Council doesn't know that, and to say we discussed it at a committee, the ones who know that, I think, are you and me, because we were in the room for that.
Mr. Mayor, you asked, first of all, we don't have a number. Mr. Mayor, you asked that question the night we voted, I should say we, the night you voted on it. And
I didn't vote, it didn't get to me, I would have voted no.
Right, but you asked that question about whether we had talked to that individual, and I believe I said something along the lines of, it's very similar philosophically for having, you know, us selling our asset like Chicago did their parking system. So that was mentioned before the council actually voted. So no, it wasn't Steve Jones's decision. It was in effect information. Now, if there wasn't enough information, you feel that should be revisited, you made that recommendation, we're gonna bring it back to finance, and finance could weigh in on this.
And I use that as an example, I'm not gonna get bogged down, because that vote passed, but moving forward, again, I think there has to be more policy decisions made about what we're gonna do, and not just go back and tell people, start giving us more money. Councilwoman Landon?
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with you, we haven't seen any specific reports on all the different properties, but we certainly had an extensive report on our vehicle replacement, and we saw the real need. I don't think it was anybody being, you know, hysterically unjust. I think it's a real need, and I think we have a lot of dangerous vehicles that are being operated. They're going to be operated in the snow if they're running. I don't know, you gentlemen can tell us if they're running at this point, but I saw them in person, and there's a lot of trouble with these vehicles.
And you know, what I've learned over 8 years, the department heads, your job is to ask for as much as you can, and that's your job, that's what you want to do. It's the city council's job to decide what's proper, and not simply just to roll over and give every department head what they're looking for. Because, again, it's not a fault of theirs, they're going to want as much as they can. So I think there needs to be a little bit of street smarts and figure out what's necessary versus what is wished for or wanted. Yes?
You know, what was the figure for the public works, public utilities, vehicles, 1 point?
Yeah, overall, but that was not just public works, public utilities. This was the entire fleet. It was 16 million.
That was police, fire, everything?
Correct.
Okay. You know, I don't know if this makes any sense at all, but if there's a concern that you know, when the accruals come in after the first of the year and in the first quarter, all of a sudden there's no deficit, that this money's, we've got a balanced budget, or the revenues were $3 or $4 million better than we thought we were. Would it make sense, like, to hold off till after the first quarter and then revisit how the revenues are coming in the first part of the year, and then implement a gas tax or whatever to pay for that bond issue for the
Yeah, I'll
for
let
the
my
vehicles?
finance experts respond to that.
I don't know. Is that?
I guess the simple answer is yes. It's up to city council to impose the tax. If the budget was passed, let's say, with these increases, then we would start with the finance committee and have change the ordinance. And then we'd go to the council as a whole. If the budget was adopted as presented without the increases, then you could increase it at any time during the year.
And then just amend the budget?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I know that, you know, I've seen these vehicles over, you know, and pictures of them and witnessed it. We've all seen them on the street, and it's getting to the point where it's I mean, it's almost dangerous to have our employees driving some of them.
I mean, do keep in mind, and he answered sort of a technical question that didn't really address part of this. If we did the gas tax later in the year, that still is predicated, the vehicle replacement is still predicated on a bond issue later in the year.
Correct.
Right. So if we ran a surplus, let's say for some reason the projection's totally wrong, we finish this year with a surplus.
Okay.
That doesn't mean we have money to fund the $4 million bond issue based on existing revenues.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So you're kind of asking one question, but I think there's another issue here that really addresses what that question is. It could be that the general fund isn't hurting, but it doesn't mean there's going to be money for a vehicle replacement program. I mean, to get a $4 million bond issue paid for, you're talking, what did I say, $488,000 or so per year in debt service payment. So you have to have that much more revenue just to break even to fund it. So,
Yeah,
that makes sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, we're talking about the fleet replacement. Does that include any of the equipment being replaced too? Because all the equipment is, a lot of it's junk too.
Yes, that would include equipment. Again, with the money that's proposed in the budget, would not just be for street department, but the other departments, city hall, everybody has needs for vehicles, and obviously we have needs for equipment and vehicles as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Steve or whoever, could we go back to, or go to pensions for a minute? One of the major increases you were showing at 2.7 million, does this have to do with more senior aged individuals retiring from fire or police or city in general that went up 32%? Or is this something we're going to be seeing, is your projection that we're going to be seeing that over the next years? This kind of an increase?
We'll be seeing increases in pensions, especially for police and fire. We have committed to fund the police and fire pension system up to 90% by the year 2041. We phased that in, so for the last 3 years, the pension contribution was a little bit lower than it would have been. That phase-in is over, and it is going to grow to a point where I think in 10 years, it's going to be over $20 million. The IMRF is the other part of the pension. The big increase from the IMRF is they lowered their interest rate assumption. And of course, that was spread over all the IMRF participants. That is also a 3-year phase-in. So after 3 years, we will, that amount will be going up too. Part of the increase is, you're right, there are more retirees. We added many in 2018, and I don't know how to say this, being nice, but we're not taking people off the pension rolls as fast as
You mean they're not passing away?
yes, they're living longer than their actuarially computed age. And so that's all a balancing act, and every year we send it off to our people, do an actuarial study, and they come back with projections.
And I can assume that none of this has to do with any of the unfunded, I assume the health liability is totally unfunded.
Totally unfunded. We're on a pay-as-you-go method. As I pointed out, the estimated actuarially computed liability is $414 million at this point. About 40% of our health care bill right now is for pensioners, and unless the whole healthcare system changes, that percent is going to grow over time.
Thank you.
Speaking of bonds, I cannot support a $6 million bond for the library. I have gotten many calls, emails. You can see the dire need that we have now. We're going to bond things out to support our own equipment coming down the road here. And I'm going to suggest it again, put it out for referendum if you want the $6 million. Because people they don't want their taxes raised. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to get around this. We're going to have to raise some, I can see, I'm not sure. I'm not speaking for the council, but I'm just speaking for my constituents that have sent me emails and phone calls. And looking at this budget, I just don't see how we can do it. Just put it out for referendum and see what the taxpayers want to do. That's my opinion, because I cannot support that. So I'm talking to you now, not next week.
Right. No, I appreciate that. Okay. Any other input or suggestions from council at this point? I mean, I haven't heard a consensus to change anything in this budget at this point. And if I'm not hearing something that you're trying to tell us as staff, please tell us.
Stephen, the one memo you sent out about the gas tax, was there some communities that was, and I'm not suggesting this, I'm just asking the question, that diesel fuel was taxed at a different rate than gasoline?
Yeah, Ken, you want to address that? You did the survey.
Sorry, one second. I had all of them attached except for that one.
Sorry.
But, you have it, Steve? Thank you. Yeah, so Steve had asked me to contact different communities, and there were several that were different. Shanahan, for instance, had a 4%, or I'm sorry, a 4 cent per gallon on most motor fuels except for diesel, which was 11 cents. I believe Romeoville had diesel fuel at 9 cents per gallon versus their other at 6 cents per gallon. So you do see that in different communities. That's not something that I think we suggested here, but I just wanted you to, as I was doing my research, I wanted you to be aware of what I saw.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One thing I would offer, and Mayor, it goes, I get it. I mean, skepticism, numbers, making projections. I think at it was either the last budget meeting or maybe when we introduced the budget for the first time to the council, I talked about the fact that I had directed the finance department by the middle of summer of 2020 to get a 5-year plan before the finance committee and before the full council. And it's one of those things that will help demonstrate the trend lines and the context and the momentum as to where we're going a little bit better. I mean, I've always been amazed, and I think I said this, and again, it's just more amazement than criticism, but we're the 3rd largest city in Illinois, and we still budget year to year to year. We're not suggesting that you do a 5-year budget, but we're talking about doing a financial analysis of where the trends. I mean, we heard several questions about healthcare and pensions. I mean, you probably didn't know that we're going to be up in the 20 million. I mean, again, because we're doing it 12 months at a time, what we're going to get the council by summer is an indication of the major revenues, the major expenses, showing where we'll be 2 years, 3 years. Now, again, there'll still be projections, but it'll allow a lot of context before the council goes into the 2021 budget. And I think that'll help shore up perhaps some of the confidence in anything that, the person that's going to be sitting in this chair hopefully soon, or the finance department brings forward to the council. So I think that will help. But, we've been, getting more and more nervous at a staff level with regard to just general financial trends.
Yes.
I heard the individuals speak, obviously, from the hotel motel industry, and one of the items that seemed to come out of it is that we as a city has stopped promoting the tourism somewhat. Is there any thought in I know you mentioned the Rialto Museum and the Slammers or the stadium, towards tourism promotion, is that part of anything?
Well, it's funny, there was a reference, I can't remember, Dan, if it was you or one of the team, talked about Heritage Corridor. And the city at one point had an on-staff tourism bureau. Obviously, recessions happen and gambling boat money goes away and people have to go more to core services. So we continue to do promotion and marketing through Heritage Corridor. It's interesting, Dan asked me a question when we were talking about the hotel motel tax. And he said, okay, if some of our membership here in Joliet, start to feel that perhaps they have to market a little bit harder because of either, the fear of this tax imposing, more skepticism with the traveler or more competitive. He says, is there a possibility that the city could get involved in some marketing? And I said, what do you have in mind? And he says, just something perhaps where the city throws a little bit of money behind marketing programs. And I said, let's do it. I said, we can come up with some sort of, reasonably priced 50-50 sharing, and that come out of the city manager's budget. So the numbers we were talking about weren't great, but I think that would help show our hotel community that, yeah, the city is doing some things that might be fearful. Hopefully they would eventually think we're doing it for the right reason with regard to cultural assets. But if some of that money could also be shared where we're helping them maybe fend off any real or imagined issues. So that's certainly something, and Dan and I could work that out. That's not even at a level where the budget that would come into play with the budget.
Thank you.
I have one more question. And I know in the past, and unfortunately Councilman Hugg's not here, and I don't want to assume he's voting a certain way or would like to vote a certain way.
Councilwoman Gavin's not here either.
Correct. But where I'm going is something that's been very specific to Councilman Hugg. In the past, he has asked that we have motions on the agenda that separate the Rialto and the prison from the general budget. Is that something we want to do, or do we want to have a single budget motion on? It's not a big deal. We could do it any way we want, but I just throw that out there.
I don't have a problem.
Okay, we'll continue.
Wait.
Yeah.
I do have one question, though. I'm on the museum board liaison, but they have changed their bylaws last year and have made me a voting member, it's now liaison. So I think there'd be a conflict for me to have to vote on the museum budget.
Okay. So we'll find a way where that's not an issue. You could abstain on that part of it without voting at all on the other.
Work, but legally, I just.
We'll figure it out. Good. Okay. All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to say, I guess the mayor and Mike might have asked a question about if we didn't do the tax increase until after the first quarter. Sounds sensible to me. I know it would affect the other side, and, we may not be able to say right now how many trucks or equipment we're gonna buy until after the first quarter as well. But I would just, I guess, hate to see us raise the tax and hurt the different industries, hotel industries, so forth, or even our gas stations. Because I did get a couple calls from gas station owners about the tax and how they feel it's going to affect them. And then we not need it, or not need that much. That's, for you, Steve, just, I guess.
Right. Let me perhaps respond to the same question a little bit more concisely, because now I'm hearing two different taxes. Certainly, the hotel motel tax, that doesn't relate to fleet. So if the council wanted to wait, let's say to March 1 to see how the fund balances came in before making that decision, that has no effect on the fleet, and that's not something that would kind of throw a monkey wrench into the planning. Keep in mind, you can't replace, even if your budget came in, that $11 million deficit turned out to be a break-even budget. Your 2020 budget isn't going to be generating the kind of revenues to pay for a $4 million bond issue. So the point I was making earlier is that if it's all about balancing the budget, that's fine. But if it's about funding something that's presently not in the budget, you need new revenues for that. So that's where the gas tax comes in. That's the 1.8 million. So they're kind of two different dynamics that exist. Am I making sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you are.
So if you're worried about the fleet, don't think about this as wait till the first quarter, because you're going to get to the first quarter and you're going to find, okay, the deficit's less or it's on target, but you still don't have money to do a bond issue.
Well, let me ask you, this, it may not have anything to do with it. I guess just today, the governor signed the bill, I guess, for the municipalities to have and somebody help me, Marty, maybe if you heard this bill, about the motor fuel tax being returned to the municipality if they don't have a certain, what do you call it, business enterprise program in place for minority participation. I don't know if we would be, I guess it was just signed today, and I got someone sent me an email from Springfield about it. And I was going to share it with you and Marty later just to see how did that, if it even affects us. I don't know if us being home rule, but I guess if you're a municipality or a road district, and it was a third thing, that you have to have some type of program in place for minority participation in order to receive your distribution of motor fuel tax money back. Not to say that that's going to affect our budget, but it might. I don't know.
Right. I mean,
but we're,
do you know anything about this? Okay, we'll research it. I mean, whatever they say we need to do to get our motor fuel tax, trust me, we're going to do what it takes to
and
get
I
our
figured
motor
we
fuel
would
tax.
do the right thing, whatever that is. So that's why I said I didn't think it would.
Yeah.
But I just was on those lines of the motor fuel tax.
And since motor fuel tax has significant restrictions as to how it's spent, I mean, basically, we use it for roadways. We don't even use it for salt or some of the other eligible things. Even if they were saying, you know, they're increasing the MFT funds by 10%, it wouldn't necessarily work to any benefit within the general fund. But that's good to know, because if we've got some program elements that we need to look at to make sure that we don't lose any funding, we'll make sure to do that.
Steve, if I could add, you know, we've had for years, probably since I've been here, I've been here a long time, this 10% participation in all of our contracts for minority participation.
And again, right.
Yes, we've had that in play. I mean, Mike's almost as long as me. He remembers when he started too, right? No, we've got that in place. We've got that. So we'll see if we have to tweak it or do something more. Okay?
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, next is public comments. Would anybody like to make a public comment? Seeing none, I guess then, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.